Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview startup founders in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes and get practical tips to overcoming challenges. Today we have Daniel from Jetify. Hey Daniel, how are you today? Thanks so much for joining.
Hey Prateek, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Daniel, before we jump into the business, I'd love to learn who's Daniel, where did you grow up, and what really got you into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur originally from Venezuela. I grew up in like 6 different countries. When I was growing up, my dad used to work for Pfizer, the pharmaceutical, and he just got transferred a lot. And so I lived in Venezuela, in Mexico, Guatemala, Spain. And anyways, eventually came to the US for college, and I've been here since then. I've always loved technology and computers. And so, got into computer science, got into software engineering. And I don't know, I guess, the tech industry tends to be very disruptive. You always see these big companies kind of growing very quickly from nothing. And I always kind of got interested in that and thought, hey, maybe that's something I should try sometime.
That's
So
so
that's
cool.
how yeah.
That's awesome. Was there like a pivotal moment growing up, in so many different countries where you were like, you know what, one day I might start my own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that were, I don't know, that planted that seed in my head. I guess one was just more watching, industries like I mean, when I was, I guess I'm old, but when I was growing up, it was more like Bill Gates, was the big thing, and like
Yeah.
how Microsoft became something out of nothing. And so I just remember, my dad telling me that story, and I was like, what really? Like, can you just start a company and then become one of the biggest companies in the world? So I remember that. And then two, I guess, yeah, just as in terms of living in lots of countries, as a kid, you're always kind of having to, I don't know, adjust to the new culture,
Yep.
meet new people, try new things. And I think that put a little bit of that spirit in me of like, hey, try things that might be risky sometimes, and maybe they'll pay out.
Yeah. Was that where the hustle came in?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Daniel, of course, that I saw that, that you all have raised 10 million. Very intrigued. Most founders use this money to expand their teams, but you decided to keep it lean. Why?
Yeah. I mean, I forget who told me this, but it just stuck with me. Yeah, somebody told me, funding is, all the capital you get from funding, it's kind of like rocket fuel, right? And you can choose when to step on it and go in that rocket fuel. But you really want to make sure you're going in the right direction first, right? Because just launch a rocket anywhere might crash into a wall. And so, anyways, I guess I've always wanted to be super sure that we're getting the right pull from our customers at different stages, and I wanna. I don't know. It's almost like I want to feel like I'm drowning a little bit with good things, like sales is going so well that I can't handle it anymore, or uh, I'm getting so many bug bug requests, but because so many people are using the product, right, that it feels like we gotta keep up with that. And I want those things to be the things like kind of drive spending the money, as opposed to just, I don't know, going a little bit crazy on the spend and then realizing that you're running out of money and that you need to shut down the company.
That's awesome. How do you maintain such strong financial discipline?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I've done it is I've tied what I want to spend to certain business goals.
Okay.
And so unless we're hitting those goals, I don't want to increase the spend.
That's awesome.
I guess that's one. And maybe number two, I'll say I am trying to do more with a smaller team. So even, just because we're small doesn't mean that I don't, like, I think we can achieve a lot with a small team. And in fact, I mean, growing too quickly, I think you also got to be careful, right? Like, I think that it can affect culture in ways you don't necessarily predict. It can affect, like, you can get overhead of a large team, right? Like there's a lot more coordination that needs to happen, a lot more meetings, a lot of that stuff. And so I think if you can achieve the same things with a smaller team, you're usually better off.
That's awesome. Is there like a little bit of like Elon Musk there? You know what I mean? When he took over, my Twitter and I think essentially cleaned it up to a certain extent.
Maybe I think Elon's more ruthless than I am. But it's that kind of, people sometimes say like try to build kind of like the Navy SEALs and not the Army, right? Like have a very tight knit skilled team that can achieve a lot together and that knows each other well and that knows how to work well together, as opposed to kind of throwing lots of bodies at the problem. Yeah.
I see that. So that said, though, right? I mean, like a lot of founders, they'd be like, "Hey, we raised all this money, and and now we're gonna just go gung ho, and we have all this money to now spend and to grow and do all of that good stuff." But I'd love to get your take. Like, what is really tough about running a venture funded business?
Yeah, I mean, a venture funded business means that you've decided to take this bet that you will become like a really large company at some point, right? Or otherwise, like the investment doesn't make sense, right? Like from the point of view of a VC, I guess if they're investing in you, they're trying to bet on that next $1 billion company, $10 billion company. And so I think when you take VC money, you are kind of choosing that path. And I mean, I hope people are aware of that when they're taking VC money, because there's other ways to build a business. You can build a more of a bootstrap business. You could build more of a kind of family-run business. And I think the VC path means that you are trying to go for like that big thing. And so, yeah, I mean, the challenge, I think, then is, well, you need to try to hit that big thing, and you need to be aware that that's kind of the game that you are in. And sometimes you have something that looks like an okay business if you're thinking small, but might not be a big business from a venture perspective.
That's absolutely fair. Yeah. On your website, Daniel, you say development without complexity. What is the pain you are solving, and for whom?
Great question. Right now, I mean, over time, our plan is to have multiple products. And so in general, we're focused on software developers. And in general, we're focused on removing all those tasks, roadblocks, extra code that you need to write that is not the core of the thing that you're building, right? Like I think as engineers, we often deal with, I don't know, I need to set up a lot of configuration. I need to set up things repeatedly over and over that I've set up previously, but it feels like a waste of time, or I need to do a lot of rote programming. And so very, very high level, long term, like our hope is to remove all of that. Today specifically, we are focused on developer environments. And so we have a tool called DevBugs that is open source. That lets you define that developer environment in a reproducible way. And so now that engineer and all their team members can recreate that environment every single time, kind of moving away from that approach where it used to be there's like a README that you need to follow the steps, and every new person that onboards has to do that themselves, and you end up with the wrong tools and the wrong versions, and it doesn't work in my computer, but it works on yours.
Yeah.
And so now you're spending more time setting that up and debugging that than you're actually spending time in kind of writing the code that you actually did want to write.
That's awesome. So, I mean, is this like a pain that you felt when you were at companies like Airbnb?
Yeah, well, so the story, I mean, I could give you, tell me what's more interesting. I can tell you how I started the company, but then I can also tell you specifically how DevBugs became one of the things that we work on. So I can cover both.
Absolutely. Let's do both.
Yeah, cool. So in terms of the company, maybe just for context, so I've worked at a lot of different tech companies. I've worked at Google, I've worked at Twitter, I worked at Airbnb. I've done a few startups as well, both joining early or joining later. So I feel like I've kind of seen every stage of company. But anyways, one of the companies that I joined is called Verta Health. They do telemedicine for diabetes. I was the head of engineering there. And one of the things I had to do when I was there was kind of establish a platform engineering team to, set up the tools and foundations so that the rest of the team can develop faster, use the cloud appropriately, etc. And I remember feeling a little frustrated with having to do that because I was feeling like, hey, we're having to do a lot of the same things we've done at previous companies. It felt like deja vu. It felt like recreating technology that everybody kinds of recreates in their own custom way.
Yeah.
And then two, the mission of that company was to reverse diabetes. And so ideally, you're focusing as much as you can towards the mission of the company. But here are some things you needed to do that weren't specific to the mission, right? And so anyways, that just made me feel in general like, oh, there's still plenty of space to kind of try to productize and improve all those tools and platforms that we use as engineers so that people can increasingly focus more on the mission that they have. And so that is the context through which I decided, okay, let's start Jetify. DevBox in particular, which is that open source tool that I mentioned for developer environments. The story there is that we were trying to create reproducible developer environments for ourselves.
Okay.
So it was like an internal itch, right? We ended up using Docker as our way to define those environments. For development specifically, we think Docker is great for shipping stuff to production, but for development specifically, we started feeling some pain points. Namely, you change a little thing, you bust the cache of the container, you're all of a sudden rebuilding the entire container, and something you thought was a small change, like, oh, you're just adding a little, dependency that I want. All of a sudden, you're waiting a while for that container to be recreated. And so anyways, we were feeling pain points like that. And so we decided to try to see what else we could do, what else was available. We found a technology called Nix, which lets you create a lot of this reproducibility kind of without relying in a container. But we felt it was too hard to use. And so we created DevBox to kind of wrap that and present a better experience. Open sourced it. Next thing we knew, we were on the first page of Hacker News based on that project. And so we kind of realized, oh, wow, people, you have this problem. So let's keep improving it.
That's so cool. So that said, though, Daniel, like, how did you go about winning your first few customers that were willing to pay you?
Yeah. So for us specifically, we're kind of very kind of bottoms up approach to go to market. And so we do have that open source tool that I mentioned. For that open source tool, we were getting great companies using us. Like we were just at a conference next week and people approach us and it's like, Rivian is using it, Akamai is using it. Some teams, I don't know if the entire company, but like some teams in those types of companies are using it. So anyways, long story short is we've been fostering our open source community. We have a kind of a Discord server where people can join. And so our general approach has been, let's push the open source, let's get people to adopt that. And then every week we talk to users that are using that open source tool, try to understand their needs and kind of offer additional solutions that complement the open source tool that are paid.
That's so cool. I'm so intrigued, Daniel. Like, how did you go about building a community? First that was so intrigued by what you were doing that they wanted to join, and then eventually started to inspire other people to join.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first part was actually that there was one element of luck there, where I mentioned, when we shared that box, it kind of took off in Hacker News, and there
Yeah.
was a lot of interest there. So we had an initial momentum that way. I mean, I think from there we've done a couple of things. We do advertise that this community exists,
Okay.
like in our homepage, in our docs, in our README for the open source project. Like we kind of list like, hey, join our community. And then I think we've been kind of responsive in terms of people filing issues on the open source project, answering questions, and so I don't know, that goodwill I think adds up, and people join, and now we see, for example, in our community, like at the beginning we were answering all the questions, and now we have people that have joined that answer questions too for others.
How cool.
I like, that's great, right? Because it's like now the community is helping each other and not just us fostering it. Yeah.
That's so cool. How do you go from building a community that's so interested to turning them into paying customers? Like, is it a touchy subject to say, hey, why not now start paying for this?
Yeah, I mean, there is always some art there, and I guess the way we've approached it, particularly at the beginning, is look, we are trying to learn from our users.
Sure.
And they know that. We want to improve, the product that we create. And so I'd say at the beginning, more than sales, it was just kind of wanting to help and understand. Of course, as we're helping and understanding, we're always saying, hey, we are a company, and we would like to have a business. So we're, as you describe the problems to us, we're also trying to understand, what of those things make sense to continue investing from the open source side, what of those things make sense to offer as managed services. And so we've had a lot of those conversations early on. Some of those conversations led to design partnerships.
Okay.
So design partnerships is basically where you agree with a customer that you're gonna, you're in the process of developing some paid product, and you might give them a great rate, or maybe a month or two free, so that you can develop it with them as users, and really get their feedback and make sure that you're solving their pain point. So yeah, anyways, that's kind of the approach we took, and then from there, I think we've created a few things that people value, and then it becomes easier to sell.
That's awesome. So today, if like you were to look at the source from where your new paying customers come, how much of that would be community led versus traditional inbound and outbound?
For us today, still the majority is community, open source, etc. I do think as we scale, at some point that might shift to, we need to spend more on I don't know, marketing, and then drive that to create inbound leads and stuff like that. But the stage we're in is still mostly the community.
That's amazing. Do you also get like users who are willing to pay from from any other efforts, whether it is additional
I think the other big thing I'd say the other big thing for us is content marketing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, writing blog posts, sharing stories. Sometimes people find those articles intriguing, get shared on Reddit, get shared on Twitter, etc., and then kind of people discover us. We've also, I don't know if to think about this as content marketing or not, but like sometimes we open source little things that are not really products, but that people like, and then they learn about us as well. So just to give you one example, there's this tiny library. It's not a product. It's a little tiny library, right? That we call Type ID. And what it does is, if you ever use the Stripe API, they have IDs that are essentially, a type, like customer or org, or a type representing the type of object that you're dealing with, and then a unique ID. And so we create a little library that kind of formalizes that pattern. It has a spec so that other people can create that same library in other languages, and all these libraries can understand the ID between each other. And it's backed by UUID v7, so it's based on a standard. Anyways, little library, we create a spec. People contributed all versions of that library for all sorts of languages. Like we have it now in like Rust, in Go, in Scala, in Node.js, I forget, like there's like a lot, right? There's, I don't know, maybe 15 of them. And so anyways, little things like that we just give back, and sometimes those get interest and kind of drive awareness of our brand as well.
That's awesome. So how many people do you have today within the community?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually don't have the latest numbers right now, so I'll have to. I need to get back to you on that one. I'm sorry.
That's fair. That's fair. But I mean, how did you know? And honestly, the community-led growth aspect of building a business is so interesting. I mean, if I were to sort of think of it, there are so many businesses, so many large businesses today that are trying to build their own communities, and a lot of them tend to fail. If there is a listener who is listening in from one of these big companies and is saying, "Hey, how do I build something similar?" What is your best piece of advice?
I have a few thoughts. One is, I think a community is the set of users that are interested in your product or that are using your product. And I'm highlighting that because, I mean, we do have a Discord server. I mentioned that. We have part of the community in there, but I don't think of the community as the set of people that are only in that server. I think of kind of like a larger audience.
Okay.
And so we sometimes spend time on Reddit. We spend some time in news. Those are kind of pre-existing places where people gather.
Yeah.
But we see some of our users there. And so, anyways, maybe that's a long way of saying it's like, one, think of your community as like that whole set of interested parties and not just maybe what you own on your own platform. I'd say two, do spend time where they might already be at. Like, sure, you might have one property like our Discord server where kind of you control it more, but there's other places where the audience is, and I think you should be going there and you should be spending time with them. And then I'd say three, I mean, I think of it as like we should try to create value for the people in our community. Obviously, we're trying to create value through our product, but we should also trying to create value through the content that we create, because maybe it touches on a commonly asked questions that we hear from the community. Or we're trying to create value because we're answering their questions in a way that others can learn. So it's not just like we didn't just solve the problem for the one person, but kind of solving the problem for the broader community.
That's awesome. So that said, though, right, when you think about adding value like to your community, is it just solely focused about you and your product and your business, or is there other or like other additional aspects of value that you tend to also add?
No, we generally, I think, want to understand their problems and see if there's ways we can be helpful. Like for example, thinking about content marketing, I actually think developers hate being too marketed, right? And so if we were to write a blog post that is just like, DevBox is the best tool, you have to use it, I think actually they might have a natural allergic reaction to it. Instead, we're thinking more like, okay, for the types of developers that use our tool, like what are the problems that they're running into? And then can we write articles about that and how you would approach those problems? And the mention of our tool might just be kind of cursory or towards the end and not really the main topic of the article.
That's awesome. Are there other aspects of your content marketing game that are really more focused on building, SEO and, like driving traffic that way?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Like, no, sorry, I'm pausing because I'm trying to think how to answer it. Like, we are not the shop that goes like super optimized on SEO.
Okay.
We do want to drive SEO content, I mean, like traffic. We do think a little bit about which keywords we want to target and that sort of stuff. So there's like some base level there of SEO that we do. But sometimes when you take it to an extreme, you end up creating articles that feel like they're just trying to hit the right keywords. And like at that extreme, we're kind of like, no, like, is this a good article or not? Like, do we? Yeah, do we think the content has value? And so, anyways, that's the amount of SEO we do. So like we think about it a little bit. We do want that traffic. We do a little bit of research, but then we cannot turn off the rest and just start to think, okay, within this area where we know might be some interest, what is the best article we can create? Is it valuable? Because we think those types of articles people will share and people will link, and that will, I think, lead to SEO in an organic way. Obviously, there's other approaches, right? You can go very hard on mentioning all the keywords, or you can go very hard on creating a lot of automatically generated AI content or whatever, but that hasn't been our approach.
That's awesome. How did you think of, your community-led aspect versus traditional, inbound, outbound stuff? Like, why did you choose to go community-led first?
I think for us, it felt very natural due to the open source nature of the business.
Okay.
Like, it meant already that we had people interacting with us for bugs and issues, etc. And then two, we did want that community. Forget sales. We wanted that community to help us build the right product. So when the company, actually, maybe this is going back in history, when the company first started, we weren't open source at first. So before we had DevBox, we were doing some tools around the Kubernetes space that were just private code. And one thing I was feeling at the time was that it was hard to get a very fast feedback loop for us, because it feels like we almost had to go through that sales motion to get the feedback. But some of that, depending on who you're selling to, but sometimes that sales motion can take a while. And so I think one of the biggest risks as a startup is you can build the wrong products, right? Like, you might have an idea in your head, but it takes you 9 months to ship or 9 months to discover, learn whether people want what you built or not. Then you're in a very slow iteration cycle. I think you're at risk of not building the right thing. And so we really wanted to speed that iteration cycle up. And really, I'd say that, like, that's what really drove us to open source. That's what really drove us to creating that community. And then it just so happened that in that same community that we were, trying to learn, we'd have opportunity to sell our paid products as well.
That's amazing. Daniel, I would love to learn, what is the greatest, what's the greatest, scrappiest story that you have as you were building either the business, the community, the product?
And just to clarify, when you say scrappiest there, it's kind of like where we had to do something kind of quick and without a lot of infrastructure around it, or like
exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. What is the scrappiest thing? I mean, I feel like DevBox itself was super scrappy, and in some ways resulted in kind of the thing we're mostly focusing now. So meaning, okay, so like I mentioned before DevBox, we were kind of building some proprietary software. The whole team was working on it. We were going through those sales motions. DevBugs was born from that like little internal need that we had, and so I actually hacked a prototype of it in like a few days.
Wow.
And then the team started using it, and then we open sourced it, and then more people started using it, and so we decided to kind of focus on that a lot more. And so, anyways, maybe the story there is like sometimes you need to try some ideas like really quick and try to get that learning as soon as you can, and decide how you iterate on the direction of the company based on that feedback. I think maybe one of the scrappy things you can do as a startup is you can learn faster than bigger companies, and you can make decisions faster than bigger companies. And so I think startups should take advantage of that. Like a very big company, I've heard it described sometimes like, you're steering the Titanic, right? And it's just like it takes a while. So because there's a lot of people. It makes sense. There's a lot of coordination. There's a lot of people that and so as a startup, you have an opportunity to react, I think, more quickly to what you're learning.
Yeah, that's for sure. Daniel, as founders, we get a lot of advice from a lot of different angles. I have to ask, what's the biggest piece of BS advice that you've ever gotten?
Let me think about that one. It's I mean, to be honest, like I don't know if it was like one specific BS, but I guess what I've noticed, and maybe more as a meta comment, is if I ask enough, for example, investors for advice, or enough even other entrepreneurs for advice, everybody tells you something different sometimes for the same topic. And to me, that helps you realize like there's no set recipe. There's no one way to build a company. So I think if anybody is being like super prescriptive, like this is the one way, and if you're not doing it that way, it's wrong. That doesn't sound right to me. Like that feels like BS, basically, is what I'm saying. To me, what I kind of settled on is I tried to get a few different perspectives, can kind of see a little bit of that 360, and then kind of form my own opinion, and then choose from there. But yeah, so if somebody's like, in whatever topic, like this is the one way, no, there's a few ways, and sometimes building a company is a little bit of choose your own adventure and kind of playing to your strengths, right? Like we're an open source company. There's open source companies that are successful, but there's also private source companies that are successful. There are companies that are bottoms up in terms of the go-to-market motion, and there are companies that are tops down. And so, maybe if you have a good sales background or you love enterprise sales, that kind of tops down approach works well for you. But if you don't love sales, or you don't have that component in your team, maybe a bottoms up approach might work better. It might also depend on the business that you're in, right? Are you selling to developers? Are you selling to somebody else? So anyways, I guess to me, BS is when people are super prescriptive, and when people kind of not taking into account the different strengths and inclinations that you have as part of yourself and your team.
That's awesome. Daniel, the one thing that's not really spoken out loud is about managing mental health as a startup founder. I know for a fact, the founder's journey can be a very, very, very lonely journey. I'd love to learn from you. Yes. How do you manage your mental health as a founder?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple things. Well, actually, first let me expand on what you said. You said it can be a lonely journey, and I agree. And I think there's times where you're trying to make a decision on maybe an important topic, and it's tough even knowing who to talk to and who to share that kind of line of thinking with. You might be afraid that it might be something that worries your investors or worries your team, and so sometimes you got like debating, who the right people to talk to it is to begin with. Anyways, to your question, like how do you manage mental health? What do I do? I mean, for me, it's a couple of things. So I do make sure to set time aside to do things that are for me, like working out. I work out every morning, 30 minutes, quick. Peloton bike, but I make sure I do that regularly. I have kids, so I have an 8-year-old and 5-year-old.
Nice.
Make sure that I have the time to spend with them and kind of get that family time every day. So I think it's important to have those moments, right? Because I think sometimes the startup can be all consuming.
Yeah.
And so you need those little break time. The other thing is, I mean, for me, one thing that really helps too is always being excited about the mission of the company. And sometimes, when things get tough, things are not going right, whatever, usually something that's happening in the weeds. But if you're still excited about that mission or that, that vision that you have, you can kind of take a moment, pause, and kind of remember, hey, why am I dealing with all of this? Why?
Yeah.
Why am I, trying to solve these problems that are driving me nuts? All because of this bigger thing that I believe in. And so, I don't know, to me, that gives me a little bit of energy back, right? It's like, okay, this is for a greater purpose. So I'm willing to kind of make it happen, just so we can get there.
That's awesome. Daniel, I'd love to learn. You've like gotten here till this point, you've raised money, you have your community going, you're figuring out your content piece. What's next for you and the business?
Great question. So we actually have a new product that we're working on. So it's early days. It's in private beta, but we're pretty excited about it. And so I guess maybe let me tell you a little bit about it. But so
Yeah.
right now, what we offer is around developer environments. You can create those locally, or we have a managed service where you can create those in the cloud. The product we've been experimenting with is actually AI driven, and I know everybody's in AI today, and we've debated for a while, how to bring that AI piece, because we wanted to do it in a way that adds value, and not just in a way that's hypey. But anyways, the technology we have internally right now is when we start a developer environment, we can have an AI agent that drives that environment. And so we are currently testing a fully automated QA tester, which is basically an AI agent. That what it does, it can stand up a product in the developer environment, and then it can kind of browse through the application and try to break it, and try to report bugs and create tests. And so it's early days, but we're excited about it because if you go back to, you asked me why I started the company and the mission and like the sorts of things. Again, it's about freeing developer time so they can focus on what they love most. And I know for a fact, at least my engineers have always hated, writing those end-to-end tests in Selenium, and they keep breaking because the DOM changed, not because the application broke, but so they need to be updated. And sometimes it feels like very rote work. And so, anyways, now we're trying to see if we can automate that to, again, give time back to engineers so they can focus on developing the features and doing the exciting parts about a product.
That's so cool. Daniel, this has been such a fun conversation. I have so many more questions for you. But how can folks keep up with you, and how can folks keep up with the business?
Absolutely. Our website is jetify.com. So, I encourage people to visit it and learn more about us. And from there, you can join our community that I mentioned before, or you can join a newsletter that we have, and we usually share articles from our blog and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for giving us some time today. I'm looking forward to following you on your journey, and hopefully we'll have you back soon enough to essentially see how you've gotten from here to the next stage.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.